Well, good afternoon or good evening or even good morning, depending on where you are on the globe. It's your old coffin dodger, of course, back here again. Right now, it is October the 10th, 2020, but I doubt if I will have this ready tonight. It's a little bit late in the evening now again, so it will probably be tomorrow evening or even Monday by the time I push the final button. And I'm going to try again to pull a few things together. I don't want to repeat what other people have done. I might want to elaborate on things that other people have done, but mostly I want to present things to you from my own perspective, because perspective, it's all about perspective. Depending on where you stand in your own life, where you're looking at life from, where you stand, that is the authentic reality that each one of us is living in. And no two of us are in the same spot at the same time and can see the same things. We can even be looking at the same things and be seeing something different. I think I explained it before in the context of blind people trying to identify an elephant. And they are feeling from all sides, and one person feels the trunk and the other person feels the tail, and another one gets to feel the tusk, another one another part of the skin. So nobody really knows what they're touching until everybody has described what they are touching. And then the whole picture comes together and say, yes, we've heard elephants described this way. So yes, it was an elephant. And the person, I suppose, facilitating that particular experience would validate what they are just after ascertaining. So that was a long introduction now to what I'm doing, but it's so long ago since I spoke to you that you might have forgotten my modus operandi. So I'm going to do things from my perspective, and you can stick it together with other people's perspectives and you will soon get your own whole picture. I'm going to start with a little piece that I found now while I was searching in the archives, and it is something that we were practicing when I did a podcasting course at the University of Wollongong, of all places, a couple of years ago. And you will be so surprised by what you hear, because it sounds absolutely ludicrous now. When we think that conversations like this might have gone on a few years ago. It's only 2 or 3 years ago, I think. But it seems totally alien right now to be even thinking of what this guy is suggesting. So here we go anyway, we'll start with that.
My top travel tip: make sure you bring a moisturising face mask with you on the plane, so that in that last half an hour or so you can put it on and come out of the plane looking refreshed, with smooth, soft skin, ready to meet those people who you're going to see on your trip.
I hope you were able to join in the laugh there, because what else can you do right now but really laugh at the situation we find ourselves in. This was the greatest of this guy's worries, was his complexion and how he would look when he disembarked. Now we don't even know if we can travel, if we can catch the flight that we have booked maybe 2 weeks ago, because so many things change so quickly that you could well be cancelled from one day to the next. I have named this podcast Identifying, Learning and Grieving. And what I'm trying to do is to identify certain things for what they are, identifying moods, identifying events, where they originated, learning about why we have reached a point where we have no bodily autonomy, basically, where we have no choice really in how we spend our days and nights. We have to consult a government now, or a government committee, an advisory committee now, before we make any decisions. And even if we make that decision, as I just said, we could make it based on something that we heard yesterday, and tomorrow everything is going to change again. So this is like major impact on our very existence and our very lives. It's one of the most brutal and traumatic impacts that I have experienced in the whole of my lifetime. I know that in other countries under other governments and regimes that this brutality was much, much worse and manifested itself in physical violence. But it's already doing that. In other countries, we see people being attacked for not complying with government regulations. And we see people being taken away from their homes and being isolated without their permission and without their family's permission. So there is a huge amount of things going on, and I'm going to try and kind of focus on these three areas. And this brutality is materializing in other ways as well. There's not a doubt about it. It is brutal to betray your neighbour. It is brutality to be left out of the care system, out of the medical system. It is sheer brutality to have medical appointments cancelled over and over again. It is brutality to be told that you are a disease carrier and have to cover your face before going into a building, to going into a shop like you used to do every day, every week. You did your shopping, and with no concerns whatsoever of any diseases that may have been rampant at the time. But now you are brutally accosted for not complying with orders. Oh yes, we are only obeying orders from above. Where did we hear that before? It's also brutality to not be able to visit your cousin, your sister, your brother, even your parents, just because they are in another county. At the same time as people from all over the globe are arriving in our cities' capitals and moving around the country unaccosted. And you might wonder why I didn't mention the word grieving yet. What we are experiencing for some time now has a lot to do with grieving. And since counselling was my area of work, I was confronted or faced with grieving persons a lot. And grief has to do with loss of something. And if somebody doesn't know what the shock of losing something is, they only have to think of maybe losing a purse, not finding the keys when they reach into their handbag. The shock that hits you when you realize that the item that you are looking for is no longer there where you put it. And in my line of work with the sick and the dying, we spoke of several phases a person went through in the course of their grieving, of their mourning. And these phases could be one after the other, as described, but they could also repeat themselves. They could come back again when triggered. They could be in a totally different order than the next person's grief and where they stand in the process as your process. So we are dealing with a huge amount of emotions, emotive material, you might call it, during this time. And I just touch on some of the things, but it might help you to look into it for yourself. And if you're unable to identify your own feelings and what makes you feel the way you feel, this little podcast might go a little towards clarifying what you have maybe always suspected but have never dared to explore. It's probably quite apt that I am doing this little podcast on World Mental Health Day, even if it wasn't intentional, because I didn't even know that it was a World Mental Health Day until it came up on social media, and I think I heard something about it on the radio as well. And it was all about reaching out and not keeping our problems to ourselves, but to seek out a service. The funny thing is that the present situation, as we have been experiencing it for almost 7-8 months now, has never really been addressed by the mental health fraternity or by the psychiatric profession. You will hear the odd voice here and there, but the mental health effects are the main effects. And as I said before on a couple of my podcasts, this is actually intentional, because we are being forced to transform from one state of being to another. It's not as if you can pop into your GP, your doctor's office, without an appointment. And even if you do call in for an appointment, you have to jump through several rings in order to be able to access the building. Even at my GP practice, there's a note on the door if I have an appointment, I have to arrive at the door to see that I may ring them and tell them that I'm outside. Now, this is assuming that everybody has a mobile phone, and it's coercion to purchase a mobile phone if you just don't have one and if you don't want to have one. So you can't pop into your practice there if you are feeling bad, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling suicidal. You cannot. And you can definitely not go in there without a face covering. I have heard several reports of people not being allowed into or past the reception area. They've got to the reception area, but have been told that this is the furthest they're going to get without a face covering. And if they refuse to comply with that, even if they've been raped 2 days before with hands over their mouths, they will not be able to access medical help. So it's a farce, really, to be holding a mental health day, World Mental Health Day, on a day where accessing mental health services is nigh on impossible. Also, the definition of what a mental health problem is varies an awful lot. For me, a mental health problem could be having to wear a mask. People who have been raped, who have been assaulted, who have been held over the mouth, they can impossibly wear anything over their faces without having a panic attack. But that's beside the point now. I'll go into the other things right now. So you might well ask, what has grieving to do with the coronavirus? Most of you will not even know somebody who has died from the coronavirus, but you will have known people who have died, and you will know that kind of loss and that kind of grieving. But the same grieving, the same mourning occurs when you lose anything that is important to you. That could be a job, it could be your school, it could be as I said before, the keys of your home or your car, things that are important. A divorce is also a loss. It is also a time of grieving for both partners. Even if one was the initiator and wanted to go, that person will grieve too. Leaving an old home and going to a new one, that is also a time of loss, of leaving behind, of cutting off, of grieving, of processing and embarking on the new phase of life. So what is happening now in our loss of freedom, loss of autonomy, loss of knowledge, of disorientation can be compared with loss of a loved one, because what we had before this event, these were things that we could depend on. We started our day in a kind of a ritualistic kind of way. We knew what we were heading for tomorrow. We could rely on the days being much the same, one being much the same as the other. That has been forcibly taken from us. It's like as if a loved one, somebody one cared for really a lot, was murdered. That is the impact that this situation is having on many of our lives. There is not one life, not even mine, that has not been affected in some profound measure. And those of you who have been diagnosed with, we'll say, with a serious illness, with cancer in particular, or with some other life-changing condition, will recognize some of the feelings that overpower us when we are sitting there and being told in words something that we may have suspected, but we wished weren't true. But once it has been formulated and it has been given a name and it has been imparted to us, these feelings that I'm going to talk about set in. And the first one is usually shock. And a lot of people describe that as the floor opened up underneath me, or the carpet was pulled out from underneath my feet. The mat, rather, was pulled out. I didn't have the same standing, the same stability as I had 5 minutes before, 2 minutes before. This shock, it's people describe it as if they get they're in a boxing match and they get a box in the stomach, takes the breath out of them, and they are hit with this shocking news. So that is usually one of the first reactions that anybody will experience when they are faced with a life-changing diagnosis. And comparing that now with the situation when we woke up on, I don't know, maybe the 29th of March coming into April, we were shocked. We were shocked to see people falling down all over the place in China. Terrible disease killing people by the dozens out on the streets. How that must have impacted on people, I can only imagine. The next thing then that comes up is usually denial. We go straight away into denial, because denial is a place where we can recover, we can feel safe. We don't have to confront this awful reality. We can forget about it. We don't have to deal with it right now. We postpone it for later. So that's what denial is. And again, many of us will have experienced that stage, maybe as a first stage. You just total denial. Goodness gracious me, this cannot be possible. So get on with life. After that then, one usually, and I can't really tell you anything about times or durations, because times are something that each individual will experience in a different way. What we usually say when we are partnering or going along with people who are in this position of having a serious illness or being given a diagnosis is we stay one step behind. So wherever they go, that's where we go as well. We're one step behind them to catch them if they fall, to be beside them if they want to talk. So there's no particular order and no particular timing to these things. But most people will have experienced their times, like between, we say, the denial and the anger, which is the next thing that comes along. You get angry. You get angry with the whole world. Why me? Why am I affected like this? People who lost their jobs, people who were sent home. We don't need you anymore. We now have a robot to carry out your work. These people have commitments based on their workplace. They have mortgages. They have repair work being done on their homes. They have just bought a new car based on the expectation of having a job for the next while. The anger has to be released. It has to come out. Otherwise you just implode. So anger is a part of it. And when you're experiencing anger, you're angry at everybody. And sadly, that anger can turn into aggression. That is the time when it's very, very difficult to be on close quarters with one another. In a lockdown situation, there's no escape. And people become afraid of one another. And the people around you feel that anger. And we are unable to name it. We blame other people. We attack other people. We are irritated. We might even be depressed. It's often a sign of anger as well. So that could have gone on in your life as well. It could have gone on in my life. And people around you could have felt that anger, and they could have been the recipient of that anger. But that is a known stage of grief and of mourning and of loss. So if you're experiencing these things, if you see other people experiencing these things, know that it is not unusual, that it is quite normal. It is so normal that it has been taken into consideration in teaching the area of ontology. Ontology is the area of being, what it means to be and not to be. It's a kind of a philosophy, but it also goes into the metaphysical, where you just are, as opposed to doing or performing. No matter what goes on around you, you are first and foremost. You're a human being, and you are. That is the area of ontology. And we know all about these stages of grief and mourning in relation to things that affect our being. And as I said earlier, we are being groomed to move from one state of being to another. That is why we were isolated. That is why we were wearing masks, because during the time of isolation, things changed within us. During the time we wear a mask, something happens behind that mask. We take on the identity of the masked person. Something happens there. So this state of being, the old state of being, is changing to a new state of being. That's why you hear the words new normal. That is why you hear things are never going to be the same again. That is because it is intentional. Changing is intentional. I mentioned in my last podcast that we are being moved and transformed from human 1.0 to human 2.0. And if you don't remember me saying that or my saying that, then go back and listen. The other changes of being are natural catastrophes that happen within our lives, natural events, life events, and they change us. But that has nothing to do with another country or another nation or another government. This is one thing, but it is comparable to what I'm talking about now. So, and what usually comes after the anger is we go into a state of bargaining. And bargaining takes on different guises, we'll say, because bargaining if you're a Catholic or a Christian, you're going to start praying to God. And you're going to say, well, God, if you give me a couple of more years, I will now go to Mass every morning. Or if you give me back my health, I will offer up my whole life to you. That's a kind of a bargaining situation. And it is much the same in the present times we are living in. We go along, we say to ourselves and maybe to people that are close to us, okay, I'll wear the mask. If that contributes to the disease going away, I will wear it. But I'm only going to wear it at home. I'm only going to wear it in the shop. I'm only going to wear it on the plane. But I'll do it if it helps to make the situation go away. So that is a kind of a bargaining mentality where you do something and you offer something in return for something else. And you may recognize this in your own attitudes and your own thinking as you go from day to day. There is a difference, though, between bargaining with God and bargaining with your government, because God is love and compassionate, and He will not demand anything of you more than you're able to give. But our government is a completely different bargaining partner. You give them your little finger and they'll take the whole hand. They see, oh, she's willing, he's willing to give the little finger. Okay, so we'll take a couple of fingers, right, until they have the whole hand. So be very careful with your bargaining there. Once you've gone through all these stages, the denial, the anger, the bargaining, and we're getting nowhere, and we haven't got a new job, the kids haven't got back to school, the older kids have been going through all this as well, the anger, the bargaining, we could well fall into a depression. And depression is one of these stages of mourning, of grief that I have been telling you about, and in association with loss. So what happens when we go into a depression? We are saddened. We are immobile in certain ways, paralyzed even. We withdraw. We stop talking to other people. We're afraid to talk to other people. And it might not just be depression as we know it, darkness. We hear about all this darkness into light. What is darkness? It's a place where we don't see much. We don't see light, for one thing, but we don't see how we can deal with this situation. So we close down. We become depressed. But we could also become very anxious, fidgeting around with anxiety, worry all day. Our thoughts chasing one another, going round in circles, looking for solutions. It could be that. It could be also guilt, feeling of guilt. What did I do wrong? I did such and such thing 10 years ago, 5 years ago, last week. So that's not a good feeling either, feeling of guilt. That it could also be low self-esteem. Depression and low self-esteem are sisters. They're very, very closely related. So this all happens in a situation of loss, of grieving, of mourning, something that we had and that has been taken away from us. These are an awful lot of emotions to have to deal with. Then there comes a stage of, okay, there's nothing I can do about it. I can see now that all my anger, my bargaining, my depression, my denial hasn't got me anywhere. It's leading to nowhere. So what do? I accept. I accept the whole situation. Some people might accept it gladly. They may be happy enough to embark on this new reality of being very ill, having to go through different therapies. It can also be applied to our present inflicted situation. We've gone through the motions of opposition, of not going along with what our governments are imposing on us, but we kind of lose the energy. We spend all our energy and we start accepting. And that is the time when the barrier comes down and we are locked in. In relation to illness, it may even be a positive thing, because when we are accepted, we are more relaxed. It hasn't as much health hazards as the other stages that we are going through. And the interesting thing about all these stages, and there are more stages as well, it goes 12 stages in some cases, but these are the main stages that I've just touched on, but they are universal. They happen everywhere. So the positive side of the situation we find ourselves in is actually that we can come together in solidarity with one another. Not the we're all in it together fraternity, but there's an old Irish proverb. It goes, through the shelter of each other, people survive. And it's in Gaelic as well, but I can't pronounce the words. But it's an old Irish proverb, and I think it's very important for this day and age and our current limbo in which we find ourselves, is to remember that if we shelter with each other and in each other, we can survive. And what I'm just after telling you also applies to the living self. When you are going through life, with every year that passes, you have to say goodbye to the old year and embrace the new year. And you have to, well, you don't have to, but usually you go through a phase of saying goodbye, of taking leave, of mourning. Really, it is a mourning of another year gone by, and we don't really look forward to old age or to what comes after. So this is a time where we are taking leave of ourselves, basically, of the people we thought we were and of the people we were. There are many authentic people out there, but there are many who were wearing masks anyway. They had a public image and a private image. And anyone that knows younger people will know that they spend hours, and especially women, in the morning putting on their faces, getting ready for the day, putting on the fancy clothing or the attractive clothing, and in order to impress throughout the working day. And it's not just about wanting to impress, it is also representing your company. You dress to represent your company and what they want to impress on other people, on their customers, on their clients. They portray a certain image. If you work for a bank, your clothing is going to be, your attire will be completely different than if you're working in a fashion shop or working for a social media company. You can go in there with just about anything. But this is all going. This is all going because now we are working from home. We can basically go to our computers and go on the different platforms with our pajamas. All we need to do is put on something on the upper body to be presentable. Nobody can smell us either, so we don't even really need any perfume. So that is the situation, and that's why I'm talking about this grieving process, is because we are moving from one type of existence into the next. We're not moving there voluntarily. We are being moved there, like it or not. So this process is guaranteed to happen with a lot of people. And the person who doesn't know this is happening is probably still in denial, because it is, as I said, it has been established from the time I was working anyway. I started in oncology. I actually started up oncology in Germany, in the hospital where I was working in 1980. And that was the time when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was very, very popular. And she was the person who put a name on all these emotions that I'm just after talking about in relation to people dying, in relation to loss of hair even. Even when people lose their hair, it has something to do with their identity. That's why, of course, the Nazis took away the identity of the Jewish people in that they shaved off their hair. Women, men, they all had shaved heads. And that was under the pretense of delousing them. But in actual fact, it takes away a person's identity. So if you can put together or gather together with a dragnet some of the things I'm after saying, and if it helps you to see where we are. I think I wrote yesterday in social media, what has become of keep the recovery going. Keep the recovery going was a slogan that we heard every 10 minutes in, I don't know, I think it was last year, maybe the year before. The country was in recovery. The unemployment numbers were going down and everything was looking bright and cheerful. Why are they not saying this with the present situation? If this virus is so deadly and we have less deaths now than we had a month or two ago, why do we not hear this soundbite? Keep the recovery going. Wouldn't that be nice? And then if they showed us ways to keep the recovery going, ways to keep healthy, ways to look after ourselves, not just locking us up and isolating us. There are ways and means of helping a person to keep healthy. And if you listen to any good nutritionist or dietitian, and they will give you loads and loads of hints of how to look after your body. Personally, I am more inclined to be looking after the soul. I would be focused on the soul. And I found something recently that I copied and kept from my next podcast, which is now. I quote, "We should not put a mask on the scriptures, spread the Bible far and wide, and never shelter in the truth where no one can hear. We should never put a mask on our salvation." End of quote. And that is the danger. If you are not rooted in your faith in Jesus Christ, it is very hard to withstand the present situation that has been going on now for 6 months or more. I would advise anyone who is in any way inclined to be spiritual to look for consolation and to look for guidance, to look for direction in the Bible. Because what is happening is we are now going through the fourth industrial revolution, and that will go under the heading of the Internet of Things. We will be hooked up to computers through hydrogel, quantum dots. I don't understand that part of it real well, but I had somebody on last podcast who explained exactly what is going to happen. So in that case, once that has happened, we are no longer in the image of God. Humans will have created a new entity, a new thing. We will be the thing, the Internet of Things. You have to be very, very mindful of the language. And I took a note here of something else, that with Jesus, a new humanity appeared. Christ conquered death and he is risen. So we have no need for a new humanism as our religious leaders are propagating or promulgating at this particular time. Jesus is the new human, and we shape ourselves, we Christians, we shape ourselves on his example, on his humanity, because he was the human above all humans. Remember when Pilate presented the abused, the scourged Jesus to the people, and he said, "Ecce homo," which translated means behold the man, behold the human. So that is the image that we wish to transform to. It would be very good for people to start doing a little bit of Bible study on their own. Just read a passage and reflect on it, what it means to you, or look for the readings of the day. You will find them online, and every day read a passage, read the two readings, which is usually an Old Testament and a New Testament piece, and you will see the connections there between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and you will also see how it affects you, because there's nothing in the Bible that hasn't been there before. There is nobody in the Bible that hasn't suffered your suffering and my suffering, that hasn't gone through terrible, terrible times, and that hasn't faltered and fallen into sin and been saved from sin. Everything is there, but there's always the promise of the coming life, of life to come. And there's always the promise that if we put our faith in Jesus Christ, that we can be changed and we can be transformed. That is the transformation that people need, and that makes people happy, and that they don't need to be isolated. On the contrary, there is no isolation in Christianity. Christianity is about coming together and praising God, just to put it very simply. But it's about community. It's about being together. It's about helping each other. It's about encouraging each other. So you see, there is a new transformation going on, the Internet of Things. We are being transformed from one state of being to another state of being. And at the same time, the World Economic Forum is talking about the 6th mass extinction event, which wipes out species. Now, there have been 5 other mass extinction events, and nobody has been able to tell me yet what caused them. And I'm beginning to suspect that some of them were artificially induced, just as this one is artificially induced. We have chemtrails, we have poison in the food, we have pesticides, insecticides, we have poison everywhere. And more and more people, I would say, like last year was 1 and 2, and I would say nearly this year it would be nearly everyone is contracting some kind of or developing some kind of an illness, whether it be because of the current situation or a build-up of years gone by when we have been, the truth about what is in our food has been withheld from us. May not have been withheld altogether, but we never bothered to check on what is in our food. Just because it's in an advertisement, it doesn't make it a good product. And as I said before, any product that needs repetitive advertising is really not necessary. Can't be that necessary. You don't hear any advertising for potatoes, which was the staple diet of people during the so-called famine. And people survived. People that had their potatoes were able to survive with the basics of foodstuffs that are naturally grown and naturally produced. We can survive anything. Yeah! So, sorry, I'm digressing from one thing to another. So that was what I wanted to present to you today. Give you food for thought. Food, there you have it again. Food, I love my food. So you'll often hear me dropping the word food. But yeah, this is food for thought. And I hope it is of some benefit to you. I'm going to finish off now with a little piece that I found somewhere. I think somebody sent it to me. It seems to me to be an advertisement, and it was recorded in February in 1956. And I'm just asking you to listen to it very carefully, what they are saying about about this year, 2020. So I shall love you and leave you. And as I have been saying since I started podcasting, look after yourselves. Look after yourselves very well. Know yourself. Know what you're capable of. Know what you're worth. Look after yourself and look out for one another.
When you think of the future, you likely envision the remarkable technologies that you've seen in comic books and films. You may begin to picture flying cars, trains driven by electromagnets, or household robots that will see to your every need. While modern scientists agree that many of these inventions are either unlikely or unnecessary, it may surprise you to learn what the future could actually hold. Imagine being able to share your thoughts with millions of people at once, simply by typing them on a keyboard and sending them through the air. Think of what life will be like when all of the many fixtures of an office, including a typewriter and an entire Rolodex, can fit within a device smaller than a loaf of bread. Consider the vacation plans you could make when a single trip on an airplane is all that's needed to visit anywhere on Earth. Yes, the future certainly looks bright, but it isn't without its darker sides. According to some predictions, obesity will likely run rampant, and political corruption will become so commonplace as to be accepted. People with nothing entertaining or informative to say will broadcast their demands for attention, and once beloved performers will become pushers of snake oil. Perhaps worst of all will be the emergence of a deadly and potentially devastating disease. Think of the last time that you contracted influenza. You were likely bedridden for days, having no appetite or desire to play games. Experts predict that by the year 2020, a new virus will rise, spreading from somewhere in Asia to the rest of the world. And with international travel being available to even the most common citizen, a sickness which would have been contained in years past will quickly spread to all corners of the globe.
Isn't that creepy? If you didn't get goosebumps there, I don't know what will move you to start investigating how long this event, this 2020 event, has been planned. Bye-bye for now.